And in a couple of weeks, Sharon's going to be giving a talk talking about non-exercise activity. Right? Did I get it right? Yeah. So I thought I would lay a little groundwork and just talk about what's the difference between exercise and activity, etc. So that's what this talk is about today. And I'm totally aware that I'm preaching to the choir here, because you guys already know this, do this. This is kind of how you're living, or you wouldn't be sitting here in the room with me. And so we are all getting older, we know that, and we're thinking that stuff that's happening to us is just because we're getting older. But there's lots of things that are proving that if you just basically, the way you live, which this program is about, are pillars, right? If you eat right and you exercise right and you take care of your brain and you do take care of yourself, then you're probably not going to age as drastically as you would otherwise if you weren't living in those, did have those behaviors that you were living by. So lots of deaths in our country are attributed basically because people are not active enough. And studies that follow lots of groups, there's lots of data out there that shows that people that are more physically active basically live longer or healthier than people that are inactive. And part of that's because of heart disease, and it's also other kinds of diseases like hypertension, diabetes, even cancers. And so, my point of this talk is not to present a bunch of research showing why exercise helps longevity. It's just that the prevailing view is that the more active you are, the less likely you are to have age-related decline. And so that's the encouragement to be an active, fit person, which is what's one of our big pillars here, and why we have this room full of stuff, is to help you work on being as fit as you possibly can at this point in your life. And one aspect of fitness, which I'm sure some of you can even relate to this on a personal level, that just because you're fit doesn't mean that you're not going to necessarily have a disease process going on. Doesn't mean you're not going to have heart disease or have something that happens. But the stronger you are, the more fit you are, the better you're going to tolerate it. And you're going to survive your heart attack better if you're starting as a fit person than if you didn't have that underlying network of strength, basically. This is just some names of some of these studies that you've probably heard of. Framingham is a really big one, went on for a long, long time. The Harvard Alumni Study is another one. And so that's just some of the names that relate to the more active you are, the healthier you are. And so the greatest potential for reduced mortality is basically staying active. And that works for sedentary people who become active later in life. And that experts agree that most physical decline that people suffer from is not because they're getting older, but basically lack of use. So use it or lose it is so true for all kinds of things, your brain and your body. And here's the upshot of the Harvard Alumni Study. Those who burned 2,000 calories a week suffered only half the annual mortality of sedentary people, and mostly because they had fewer heart attacks. So being active is good. And the contrast, so when you're inactive, you're more likely to have more issues. So there's a higher rate of cardiovascular events and a higher death rate in people who have low levels of fitness. Midlife increases in activity are basically associated with a decrease in mortality. So tons of stuff out there that you should stay active to stay longer. And I wanted to review these guidelines. So there's guidelines out there. They're all over. They've been there a long time. So back in, 30 years ago, 1995, the U.S. Surgeon General and the American College of Sports Medicine recommended that people get at least 30 minutes of moderate intensity activity most days of the week, which adds up to about 150 minutes a week if you did that for 5 days in a week. And it didn't matter if you did it all at one time, you could spread it out over the week. So those were the guidelines, 30 years ago, 30 minutes most days of the week. And then 10, 15 years later, they updated the guidelines, and they're really the same. They just got more convoluted and complicated. And so they said for substantial health benefits, adults should do at least 150 minutes, 30 minutes, 5 days a week of moderate intensity activity. But then they added the stipulation that if you worked out harder, you didn't have to do quite so long. So if you had some equivalent of moderate or more vigorous exercise, that was a good thing. And whatever you're doing should be performed in episodes of at least 10 minutes, and it should be spread throughout the week. So they got a lot more complicated. And they also added, for additional and more extensive health benefits, adults should increase their aerobic activity to 300 minutes, which is 5 hours. So an hour a day through 5 days a week would get you 300 minutes, or 150 minutes if you're more vigorous, or some combination of more moderate and vigorous. And so again, it becomes personal choice, but the bottom line is it's still at least 30 minutes, 5 days a week, or 150 minutes a week. And they also suggested that people add some strength training. So adults should do muscle strengthening activities that are moderate or high intensity, involve all your major muscle groups 2 or more days a week, because that's going to be some health benefit. And we're going to talk more about strength training at the end of this talk here. So, and the other recommendation is that basically any activity is better than none. So avoiding inactivity is what you really want to do. So some activity is better than none, and adults who participate in any amount of physical activity gain some health benefits. So those are the guidelines, and there probably are still out there that you're going to run to if you Googled the CDC recommendations for stuff. And just a little summary of that you want to get a minimum of 30 to 60 minutes of activity most days of the week. And the time can be shorter if you work out harder. And it's also encouraged that you do muscle strengthening exercises at least twice a week. So those are the current guidelines. And I printed this up. This is just a fun little graphic that actually now comes from not the CDC, but from the World Health Organization. So it's just really the same summary of the same thing, that the 150 minutes per week is a recommendation, or 250 minutes a week if you're more active. And if you're a kid, they are saying 60 minutes a day, and at least 2 days a week doing some strength stuff, and 3 days a week, oh, this is new, some balance and strength activities. And more is better, obviously. So if you do more than 300 minutes per week, theoretically, that's to your health advantage. And their encouragement there is that basically anyone who can should try to do more than 300 minutes a week. So I'm just kind of curious, do you guys ever track that? Could you speak to say that you're doing 150 minutes a week? You're doing 300 minutes a week?
So how long are you walking?
Right. Do you walk every day?
Most.
Yeah, so you're probably getting your at least 300 minutes. I would sound. Yeah.
Does it need to be at a certain pace?
No, it's just time. We're talking about time.
So even slowly walking the dog, operating.
Sure, that counts. You bet. Be better if you moved quicker, and you wouldn't have to go as long if you could go faster or get your dog to go faster. But sometimes that doesn't work that way. Anyway, those are the recommendations. And so I think you are aware that all of us, most of us, came from UC Davis, and we used to manage this program called the reversal program. And when we did that program, we had some specific guidelines, and this was the goals for that program, that we encourage people to get to do cardiovascular activity for at least 45 minutes at a session, 45 to 60 minutes of sustained cardiovascular exercise, whether it's a combination of 15 minutes in 3 places or whatever. Do that 5 days a week. We did encourage 2 to 3 days of strength training, and we also encouraged a lot of flexibilities. Those were the goals for our program. And indeed, in this program, those of you that might have sat down with somebody, we kind of have the same similar goals. We're hoping that you're doing at least 30 minutes of sustained cardiovascular exercise, whether it's in here when you come in here or at home, so that you're doing that, getting your 150 minutes in somewhere. And it's very individualized. It's whatever works for you. And since we're only here 3 days a week, obviously you're not going to get in 150 minutes 5 days a week by just coming here. But if I will share a few. So if you're doing my 1 o'clock circuit thing, which is 60 minutes, you're certainly getting 150 minutes of exercise on those days if you come all 3 days and did it those days. So you could say that you're getting that amount of time if you're working out with me 3 days a week, which some of you are and some of you aren't. And that's just people. This is all, again, very individualized, personalized, what works for you. But those are the overall goals, that you're getting some time in, and you're doing it regularly and consistently. And the 2 strength training workouts a week is still a recommendation. And we do a lot of flexibility stuff. And the longer we're here, we're doing more and more balanced stuff, because that seems to be an issue for lots of us as well. So that's sort of a combination thing, doing some things that relate to helping your balance as well as helping your flexibility. So those are the basic goals for this program. And despite all this stuff, the CDC saying that this is what people should do, the vast majority of Americans aren't meeting that goal. So at less than 1/4 of the country is meeting this minimum recommendation of 150 minutes a week. And here's a graph that's this is from 2015, but showing what the prevalence of people who exercise at this workout. Bless you. So California, so the national average is about 23% of the population, and California is slightly over that national average. And the South is always dinged the most. I don't know what goes on in Mississippi and Alabama, but huh? You do? At any rate, they have the worst pictures all the time in terms of obesity and diabetes prevalence, and now exercise prevalence. So it must be really hard to live in Mississippi and Alabama and be healthy. I don't know. Florida's all 21. That's not as bad as Mississippi. The white.
Right.
Canada's not on here at all.
No.
Kansas. Oh, Kansas is 23. The gray is that they're actually at the average. The blue is slightly above the average. And like Montana and North Dakota, they're below average. And the red are significantly lower than the US average. New York, it's bad in New York. Arizona's 26.3, Utah, Idaho. Alaska's only 27, 28. Idaho's 31.
I'm surprised about New York because most people don't drive and they walk the city.
Well, maybe the rest of the country pulls them down. I don't know.
Probably.
Yeah. Yes, I think you're right. Texas, New Mexico, Kansas, Nebraska, that's kind of a gray. And that's greater than, but not significantly different than the US average. So they're around average. The gray ones are
You
average.
could almost overlay that with the political. I was thinking the same thing.
The blue and the red states. Yeah, well, I don't know what that means then. Yeah, sad. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit of time about what does it mean to be, what is exercise? Okay, so when you exercise, you're doing something that has its specific purpose in mind. So there's lots of different ways you can exercise. So if you stretch, you take your joints through their range of motion, you bend, you reach, you do those kinds of activities. Those are activities, that's exercise you're doing to help your flexibility. If you do resistance exercise, that means you're lifting body parts against gravity, and whether it's because you have an added weight or it's just a body part that's the weight, that part doesn't matter. The notion is that you're lifting something against gravity, resisting gravity, and so those are the exercises that basically impart strength. They make the muscles grow, get bigger, because they are adapting to this resistance that applied to them. And then the cardiovascular activities are the sustained things, the thing where you use lots of muscle groups in a continuous rhythmic fashion, like walking or cycling or rowing or swimming or pumping up and down on the elliptical, whatever might be the activity that you choose to do. If it's sustained and uses lots of muscles, and another part of that is it helps your heart rate go up to accommodate that, then that's basically a cardiovascular exercise. And I just want to throw this term out here because I think it's important, the older that we get, to be aware of this thing called our functionality. So if we have good function, that means that we can function. We can do the stuff that we need to do. You can get up and down. You can reach in your cupboards. You can do your tasks of daily living easily and get through life in an okay fashion. And so these self-care tasks, these tasks of daily living, obviously we totally take them for granted. We don't ever think about the fact, can I do what you need to do? Because you're just doing it until you get into a limited situation, right? Maybe you had a surgery or some sort of event that messed you up so that you weren't able to do these basic self-care tasks. And then your life gets really complicated, right? You want to basically manage your ability to maintain your function the best that you can. So that's my personal opinion, but I think you kind of all agree. So these keeping your function is important, why your fitness fits into that, and where so the strength in your legs to pick you up, the strength of your arms to help you get up, all that fits into maintaining your function. And I'm just encouraging you to maintain your function the best you can, because it's the downside is pretty down, right? And this is speaking from a mother who's been bedridden for 3 years, and it's heartbreaking to watch what she can't do. And you don't want to be in her position, in my opinion. Anyway, so that's it. To stand, vital exercise to keep those leg muscles in shape so that you can maintain your function and always be able to get up. Yeah, do that. Some of both, to be honest.
So is it okay to use it?
Well, I think, yes, it is okay. The bottom line is, are you getting up? However it takes you to get up, are you getting up? That's what you want to do, is always maintain the ability to get up. Okay, so activity, I don't have a lot in this presentation about this notion of METs, but it's an applicable concept, and it's just a word that describes your metabolism and relative to rest. And so if you thought about, we're sitting here, we're breathing, we're alive, we're metabolically active, and the cost of that, we're going to call 1. So 1 MET is just the energy cost of sitting, okay? And an activity can be evaluated basically relative to that. So an activity that's 3 or 4 times as hard as just sitting in here, then that's called a 3-4 MET activity. And the more all those tasks of daily living, the getting up and down, doing stuff that you need to do, for the most part, the tasks of daily living have a metabolic cost. It's probably in the 2 to 3 MET range. Some stuff is more vigorous, say you're climbing stairs to vacuum, or you're mowing your grass and vigorously moving back and forth. Maybe you're doing 4 or 5 METs, 4 or 5 times as hard as rest. So, but that's the general picture, that you're increasing your metabolism by a factor of maybe 3 or 4. And for the most part, that's pretty well tolerated, unless you're in a super compromised position and your function has declined a lot. And so somebody that has a lot of heart failure, whose capacity to do work is only about 3 or 4 METs, obviously those things are even tough for them, right? And we all probably know people in that category, that they're so compromised that their basic function is a chore, but they do it, they do the best they can. So the more vigorous an activity, the higher is going to be its metabolic cost. And any activity that requires you to breathe harder and to get your heart rate up and increases your metabolism is going to be an increase in your physical activity. And maybe Sharon's going to talk more about this in a couple of weeks, so I don't want to steal her thunder. But stuff that you're doing throughout your day, when you're working in your yard, when you're doing your housework, when you're walking up and down in the grocery store aisle, those are activities where you're increasing your metabolism and you're doing things. And that adds to your caloric expenditure expenditure for the day, right? That's how we manage our weight and take care of ourselves, is how many calories does it take to get through the day, and do we eat correspondingly to make sure we have enough energy to get through this 1,200 calories of burned energy. So a physical activity basically is any movement where you're using your muscles to do stuff, and it's going to be burning some extra calories. And again, we do this, some of us, throughout our day because we do stuff. We work in our yard, we work with our kids, we do other activities, we like I said, you go shopping, you walk around, and it's that kind of activity Sharon's going to talk more about. It fits into this picture of making you a physically active person, and it's separate from exercise that's specifically done for the reason of improving your stretching, improving your flexibility, making you stronger, or getting your heart rate up and doing your cardiovascular stuff. And that's lots of people don't have a quote regular exercise routine, but they're super active, right? They spend their whole lives moving and doing stuff. So what's the healthier picture there? It's kind of hard to say. So I think those of us that don't have that underlying high level of physical activity because of our occupation or our lifestyle choices, then we're the ones who need to spend more time thinking about, am I getting my 150 minutes in? Am I doing my workouts on a regular, consistent basis? It's all very individualized. And so a lesson from the blue zones, we've talked about them before, that, those are the places in the continent or the world where that people live a long time. And the general consensus of those people that are living to be 100 do so because of their lifestyle, because they're not because they have gym memberships, but because they do things in an active way, and they're connected, and they live like we do. They follow our pillars, right? They take care of themselves, they eat right, they are socially connected to one another, and their normal way of connecting with each other is, walking around the neighborhood and visiting, those kinds of things. So it's all a plus, and those are the perspective with the concept of being active and living a long time. That's how it all kind of fits together. Okay, any comments or questions about exercise versus activity? I did want to spend a little time talking about strength training specifically, because I think it's important. And we all, many of you do a lot of strength training with me, some of you don't. And going back to the CDC guidelines, are you doing at least a couple days a week where you're doing some resistance types of exercise? That would be to your advantage. And that really does fit back to that concept of maintaining your function. Those tasks of daily living, that ability to get up off the toilet and to get into the car to go to the store, etc., all really relates to your function and your strength. And so that's should be a priority the longer you're here on the planet. So I mean, basically encouraging to think about your own picture of strength training, and are you doing some stuff to maintain your strength the best you can? And so when we're talking about strength, it's really the specific individual muscles that have, the ability to move and to lift, generate tension, and to contract and do stuff. And so when your muscles are fit, that helps you overall because you maintain your function, and you can walk better if your leg muscles are strong enough to let you do that. So this muscle fitness, which has both a strength and also an endurance component to it. So can you lift enough weight, and can you do it repeatedly? Can you carry the 5-pound, sack of sugar all the way up into your house? You have the endurance of those muscles to make it into the house because the muscles are strong enough to hold it. That matters, that fits in. So I don't want to dwell on this, but I just mentioned some things about strength training if you're thinking about doing it or you are doing it. What happens when you lift weights, if you're doing it appropriately, meaning that you're trying to exert a lot of tension on a muscle, those kinds of activities, because it's not rhythmic, because it's a burst of energy, it basically can have a profound effect on your blood pressure. Your blood pressure can go up a lot if you're trying to strain and lift a lot of weight. And that also fits into your overall strength level. So if you're strong enough to lift a certain weight and you can do it and do it repeatedly, then obviously your tolerance for it is pretty good. And so it's not going to profoundly affect your blood pressure because the strength of the muscle is adequate to lift that given weight a lot, which is why it's helpful to do some strength training to make the muscles more fit so that you can do things without having it be this profound effect on you. And then obviously our notion is, we don't go around, typically trying to bench press twice our weight or anything, so that we are trying to exert so much tension that it's going to really jack our blood pressure up, as bodybuilders sometimes do. So we're in the perspective of being logical and commonsensical, and are doing strength training to make our muscles stronger and improve our function. And so we're not trying to lift huge amounts of weight, but we're trying to lift an amount of weight that makes the things that we need to do tolerable and comfortable. So again, it relates to what you do and the stuff you have to do. And I think for the most part, we like to have the ability to carry our own groceries into the house and those kinds of things. So having that strength is going to be helpful in that regard. And so another concept about exerting a lot of tension and trying to lift a really heavy weight and having that be bad for your blood pressure, that's more profoundly affected if, number one, you're trying to lift more weight that you can really lift. And also, are you doing this thing called Valsalva? Are you holding your breath while you're trying to lift weight? That's basically compounds the impact of making your blood pressure go up. So bottom line is, if you're lifting weights, please breathe. So, and if you're having to hold your breath and doing this bear down thing by holding your breath, then that's not good for your blood pressure. And so pay attention to that. And most of us don't lift enough weight that we have to worry about that. But you need to be mindful of that's not the goal, is to lift a lot of weight. It's the goal to make the muscles lift as much weight as they can comfortably lift and to make them better. So you got lots of muscles in your bodies, right? And so there's lots of choices. And if you're only going to do strength training twice a week, there's no way you're going to probably do all the muscles in your body. So you probably individually want to figure out what are the priorities for you and the things that you need to do. And so I've alluded to the fact that your quad strength, your thigh muscles is an important place to have strength, because you want to be able to get up. So that's a critical thing for your function. And if you're not doing activities like walking or biking and maintaining your leg strength, then maybe you should be doing some resistance exercises specifically for your quads. For the most part, since we don't walk around on our arms, we tend to be less fit in our upper body than our lower bodies. So most of the time when we lift weights, we do a lot of arm stuff. And your core is a really important part to think about, which is the muscle supporting your torso. So your abdomen and your back, and also your quads and your hamstrings are part of your core. And those are places where you want to have fit, strong muscles, because they hold you together and they help you sort of maintain your function, right? It's important. So these are the places where you should, if you're going to create an exercise program or a strength training program, what are the exercises that you want to do? And what makes sense is to have, the exercises that you like, that you need to work on these muscles, and these are the ones that you're going to do, and basically pick a time to do them a couple times a week. When we lift weights, we typically do, a set of X number of reps. So the workouts that I lead, we typically do a given exercise for maybe 30 seconds, maybe 45 seconds. And in those 30 to 45 seconds, there's probably 15 to 20 reps happening. And so that's sort of the encouragement for people in our category, that we're just trying to maintain our function, maintain our form. So we want to do a weight training program that's focusing on, yes, a high number of repetitions and not a huge amount of resistance. Okay. So sometimes weightlifters, if you talk to any of them, they do weight routines where they do, a lot of weight, high resistance, but just a few reps, 3 to 5. And that, in terms of bang for your buck and making the muscles stronger, that's why their approach, again, that's going to feed back to those high blood pressures that's going to come about from that. And so from our perspective, this health perspective, we want to do a weight training program that's high repetitions, not so much resistance, but enough resistance that you're actually making the muscles stronger, okay? And doing one set of any given exercise has a great strength benefit to it. And if you really wanted to maximize the strength benefit, then you would do maybe a second set or a third set. That's sometimes helpful. But again, it's your personal choice and how much time do you have and what are the things that you like to do. So at least one set, maybe 2 or 3. And lifting weights, it really does matter your technique. So you want to, if you're going to be giving a given specific exercise that is a strength training exercise, you want to do it right. You want to make sure your technique is right so that you're straining the right muscle and not using your back to do a biceps curl. Okay, so you have to pay attention to your technique, and you possibly need to get some help with this, which is why there's personal trainers out there in the world and people that work in health clubs and help people with their form. And it's also helpful to actually watch yourself once in a while. Do it in front of a mirror so you can see that you're actually not using your back as you're doing an arm exercise, those kinds of things. So technique does matter. It's important to quote, be right. And you tend to screw up your technique, basically, if you're trying to do too much or you're lifting more than you can comfortably lift. And some of you might have experienced that before, but for the most part, it's not a big danger in here because we don't lift enough weights, but we try. That makes sense? So I thought I took this one out, but this is just interesting. Strength and longevity that, let me see if I can even remember it. This one's better. So I just thought this was kind of interesting that people, basically all-cause mortality, weaker people don't live as long as people who are stronger. But I need to look back and see where this actually came from. But I think it's important. So I'm just encourage you to do some strength training and be strong, because the strong ones are the ones who survive. And I wanted to add another note about about I guess role modeling would be my choice here. So some of us are later in life when we're trying to figure out this stuff that we never ever did before. And that's harder than if we had grown up doing it, right? So the possible encouragement that as you take care of yourself, that you just be mindful of the fact that you're a role model for the people that are beneath you, your kids, etc. And so if you model healthy behaviors, then your children are more likely to have healthy behaviors. Although that's not working in my personal situation very well, having a son who's not very healthy. But you keep that in mind, so that's part of your agenda as an older adult here, is the habits that you're imparting on others, which doesn't help your health, but certainly will help their health in the long run. And since hopefully they're going to be helping you later in life, I guess it's to your advantage to make sure that they stay healthy too. So that's my only note there. And I wanted to throw in something here about intimate activities or sex, because that's an activity, right? And the average energy cost of having sex is about 2 to 3 METs, probably. So 2 or 3 times as hard as rest. And obviously there's a big spectrum there in terms of how vigorous you could be involved in some sort of intimate activity. And so it doesn't necessarily count as exercise because it's not usually sustained for that 10 or 15 minutes. So you're probably not getting a great cardiovascular benefit from having sex, although maybe you are. So that, again, is an individual choice and kind of what's going on there. And I do have a story there. A long time ago when I worked at the reversal program, and part of my job was doing stress tests on people that had been participating in the program and exercising. Every 6 months, they would come in and do a treadmill test, and we'd just keep track of how fit they were. And I remember doing a test on a guy who hadn't been around for like 6 months. And so I'm getting ready to do this test on him and his 6-month assessment, and asked him, okay, so, we haven't seen you much lately. Have you been, working out? What kind of activity have you had over the past 6 months, so that I can figure out if you're going to do okay on this test or not? And he says, well, no, I haven't been working out, but I've been having a lot of sex. I have a new girlfriend. So it was, oh, okay. Huh? Yeah, that's great. Good to hear. And I want to say he did really well on the test. So for him, I think it was helpful. Let's keep that in mind. Anyway, here's a pyramid that is basically the encouragement is to keep active, to do the minimal stuff is beating up a scotch potato, and day to day you want to be as active as you can. And there is kind of a dose response between how your health and so we talked about that 150 versus 300 minutes. So the more, which is equivalent to calories burned as well. So the more calories you burn per week, basically the greater the health response. There's a sort of a plateau. So if you're exercising a lot, you're not going to get as much benefit as just a little bit more. And there's also a risk health relationship to be mindful of, so that the more active you are, the greater the benefits. But you also want to be mindful of that the intensity and the harder you work, obviously, the greater your risk of maybe hurting yourself. So you have to bear that and put that into perspective with what you're doing. And so you don't want to be exercising so hard that you're hurting yourself, because that's not to your benefit to make yourself in a better place. And this feeds back to that notion of role modeling and picking activities that you like. And this is my son, who actually is going to be 40 next month. And I think the world has actually kind of changed, because when he was a kid, kids by nature just moved, right? That's what they do. And those Bill Keane comics where the guy's walking all over the place with the little dots. So typical, you know, they walk in a straight line. They move right and left and go all over the place. And hopefully kids today are still doing that, and they're not so ingrained in their technology that they aren't moving as much. But that fits into it. And again, going back to the things that you want to do and how you're going to keep your own personal level activity up. It's not a bad concept to think about the kid in you and what are the things that you like to do. So you're going to be more active and continue to do things if they're things that you enjoy and you get pleasure out of. And it doesn't make any sense to make yourself do something just because you think it's good for you if you hate to do it. So find something there. That's really all I had. So questions, comments?
I missed out on the number of hours that we could be doing exercise.
150 minutes, which is 2.5 hours. 30 minutes a day. 30 minutes, 5 days a week.
One of the interesting things that I just learned about was on my smartphone is what's it called, fitness. Counts the number of steps you take.
Right.
I never even knew about that. So my son told me about it. He just started a job at Home Depot at Lowe's. He said his step count, he walks about 10 miles every day.
Well, yeah, I believe it.
So that seems like it's a really good thing to have. So that's why the guys at Ace are rolling from the weight.
Because they don't have as big a store to walk around. Yeah, so there's a lot of cool fitness apps